afternoon, everyone. This is Tom Moore from VikeFans.com, and I'd like to welcome longtime Star Tribune columnist and Viking media newsbreaker Mark Craig to our broadcast. Mark, it's great to have you here and joining us today. Are you ready to talk some Minnesota Vikings football?
Yeah, let's go, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Well, Mark, I wanted to start today by asking you if you can explain the phenomenon in the Twin Cities that even when the Minnesota Wild are headed for the playoffs and it's the opening of baseball season for the Twins, the public is still more interested in the first day of off-season workouts this week for the Vikings than any other sporting activity. What's the deal?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the NFL having 16 games. I know they're trying to play 18 games. They're trying to stretch themselves year-round, but I think it's just the fact that the NFL is still an event, and it's 16 contests, and if you got the postseason and everything, the NFL does a great job of keeping interest year-round, spreading things out. That's why you see the draft in May. Everything's spread out, but everything's geared toward minimal amount of games. Fantasy football and gambling. I mean, that just fuels it and just keeps it going year-round.
Well, I'll tell you, for a guy like you, it's hard to take vacation because there's no off-season.
That's why you hire young and you get them in. They do a lot of work in the off-season. So, Matt Venzel, a guy we got from Baltimore, doing a good job. He just started, and Master Tesfacion. We actually, hired a third guy. He works on a website, and they do a lot of work, and it's a lot. It's all hands on deck most of the time.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, you've been covering the NFL since 1991, and I'm curious from your perspective, how difficult is it for you these days to see some of the unprofessional types in what I call internet media, and kind of in quotes, who seem to just throw out unsubstantiated rumors rather than seeking actual stories or accurate sources in news? I mean, it almost seems like guys who toss out rumors today are wrong 99 out of 100 times, but then they're rewarded somehow for the one rumor that actually materializes as fact.
Everything has changed, not just sports journalism, but gotten to the point where I think people enjoy rumors, whether they're true or not. And it used to be if a rumor was false, it would be a big deal. Now it's they just just correct it and move on. I think overall, the sports fan is far more educated than they are, but I think they kind of lost. There's a line where they kind of lost the trustworthiness of where they get their news, where rumors are coming from, and how you see blatant examples of. And I'm not nothing in particular, but just out there where you'll see something thrown out just to, hey, look at me. Here's what I've heard. And I think people play a little fast and loose with the rules all over, not just, the ones you mentioned.
I got a chuckle out of it. I couldn't help it when on your Twitter post this week, saw the one where the guy quoted, when I talked to Adrian Peterson, and then you responded saying, well, it was a conference call. Everybody heard the same thing. It wasn't a personal conversation, so...
That was thrown out. I mean, it wasn't even the answer to the question, and then to that person's question. That to me was kind of bush league, but that's just the way things are now, and it's actually Twitter has really helped the business, and it's a way to interact with fans more directly. And like I said, fans are. I mean, they are. They've never been this more tuned in and intelligent and know what's going on, and however they get that information. And when it comes to the NFL, there's enough meat on the bone for everybody. So I think we can all exist. But that one instance was kind of, it was comical to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we turn our attention to the 2014 Minnesota Vikings, fans have been really anxious about the quarterback position since about the second game of 2013. And now the re-signing of Matt Castle makes him the obvious favorite to start the season, but he tended to struggle mightily against the better pass defenses last season. And Mark, what I wanted to know from you is, when you think of what offensive coordinator Norv Turner has in mind, what do you think he can do to help find a higher ceiling of performance for Castle in 2014?
Well, I think Norv being Norv, and everybody knows is, what he can do for the quarterback, for the running back, receiver, everybody, tight ends. I mean, I just have a feeling that he is going to be able to get whatever it is. I mean, he's going to be able to get much more out of it, just for the simple fact that look how long it took Bill Musgrave to come up with something simple for Cordero Patterson. I mean, boy, it took until the second half of the season, probably deep into the second half of the season before the simple notion of, hey, let's just get this great athlete, let's throw him a toss sweep, and see what he does. And then, he goes for a touchdown a couple times. And I think that you're gonna see, not necessarily, well, you're gonna see more creativity for sure. But and when you talk about Castle, people do tend to forget the bad games that he had, focus on the good games because the quarterback position is so wanting there. But, with Norv Turner, I just think you're going to see some more common sense of, hey, we got to get Patterson involved, period. We got to get him involved. None of this, well, he plays behind Jerome Simpson. Well, he's new. He's still learning. No, he's an athlete. You're going to find a way to use him. And I think a guy like Norv Turner does that from day one.
We think of Norv Turner and even General Manager Rick Spielman. They've stated this offseason that they're anxious to see what Christian Ponder can bring to the new offense. And from what you know about this staff, are these statements just posturing to drive Ponder's price up for a possible trade before the season begins? Or do you think the staff actually still holds hope for Ponder being the future long-term starter in Minnesota?
No. Honestly, if they felt that way, then you wouldn't see them. They're kicking the tires on every quarterback that can throw the ball. Yeah, every top quarterback and mid-round quarterback there is in the country. This is the quarterback tour this offseason. Now, that's not to say that they can't get something out of Christian Ponder. Maybe at some point he's a long-term backup guy. Maybe he becomes a Matt Castle someday. But no, if they felt that way, there would be much more different handling of the situation. I'm afraid that I'm not saying that Christian Ponder couldn't be, and Alex Smith. Later into his career, he finds the right coach. And they work together. But, the focus right now is not on Christian Ponder. It is on Matt Castle carrying them until whoever they draft can take over.
Well, one quarterback story that never seemed to get fully answered last season was what really happened with Josh Freeman. He clearly had some success in Tampa Bay early in his career, but he looked almost lost in his one appearance for the Vikings. From what you know and what you've seen, was this an inability for him to pick up the offense? Was it a talent issue? Or maybe something else like a work ethic problem?
I think it was more of a realization of just how hard it is to Peyton Manning didn't become Peyton Manning just by showing up on, in week 4 of an NFL season or, when he was traded to the Broncos. The preparation that it takes to be able to start in the NFL, it starts in February. It doesn't start in October. And I think you just saw the fact that that's just an impossibility. You cannot bring a guy in during the season and throw him in there. And, the coaching staff felt comfortable that he could start that game against the Giants. A complete disaster, and then from there on, it was just probably never a consideration again.
Well, in your NFL draft blog this week on StarTribune.com, you posted an amazing stat about the Vikings' lack of success in drafting a solution at the quarterback position. And I think it was something like 12 out of 24 quarterbacks that the Vikings have taken in their history in the draft have never even started an NFL game. And from your perspective and what you've seen over all these years, why do you believe the Vikings scouting department has had so much difficulty finding a young quarterback capable of leading the team even for 5 to 7 years?
Well, I think that the stat was 12 of the 24 after target. The first quarterback they ever took was Clan Tarkenton. He did okay. And then 24 picks after that, 12 of them didn't play for the Vikings. There were some that played in the NFL but went on somewhere else. But no, it's always been, and they've never had a top 10 pick. They've never picked a quarterback in the top 10. The highest they've ever picked a guy was Culpepper, 11th overall. Now, some of that is due to their consistency and during the Bud Grant years and always being at the top and not drafting in the top 10. And even, after that, they've been overall a pretty consistent franchise and not having a lot of opportunities in the top 10 to take quarterbacks or it hasn't fit when it's been a need. You look at 2005, Culpepper is coming off of a season in 2004 where he, without Peyton Manning throwing for 48, 50 touchdowns, whatever it was, and winning the MVP, Dante Culpepper wins the MVP that year. Mm-hmm. So in the 2005 draft rolls around, Vikings have 2 of the top 18 picks. They take Troy Williamson 7, Erasmus James 18, Aaron Rodgers goes to the Packers at 25. At that point, it's hard to blame the Vikings for not taking a quarterback because there were some questions about Rodgers, and the fact that Culpepper's coming off a career year. But these are the things that they need a talent evaluator in there to be able to project long-term and see deeper than you or I or the average fan and be able to pick these guys, and they just have not been able to do that. There has to be a talent evaluator that can project long-term, be able to you've got to keep that position manned by a young franchise guy, or you just don't have a chance. If they had a young franchise quarterback right now, Leslie Frazier would still be the be the head coach.
Talk about having a good draft talent evaluator there, and we've got a new one today. His name is Mark Craig. We're going to put a scenario in front of you, and obviously the Vikings pick high.
You're in trouble.
Yeah, I know. Well, they picked high this year, number 8 overall in the first round of the May 8th draft. And based upon what you've seen of the draftable college quarterbacks so far, if all the top options are still available to them when the Vikings are on the clock at number 8, who do you think is the best fit to run Norv Turner's offense if they take a quarterback there?
Well, I mean, if everyone was there, there hadn't been a quarterback taken in the top 7.
Right.
You know what? I've thought about this a lot, and the Manziel scares me, but I think he's a guy that I've come to the conclusion. The draft is all about taking a gamble. You're just gambling on a guy, no matter whether it's 1 overall or it's a 250th pick. You're taking a gamble. And I think that I've come to the conclusion that I personally would take a gamble on Johnny Manziel. I just like his. I mean, people focus on what he does. To me, he's a 20-year-old guy having a lot of fun in college, but you get the sense that he is the personality that I think could lead a team, and the guy that I would take a gamble on would be Johnny Manziel.
Okay. Well, let me give you a little twist on that. You're now still at number 8, and all the other quarterbacks are gone except Manziel, but Khalil Mack is there too. Does Spielman pull the trigger on Manziel, Mack, or does he trade down for more picks?
Well, linebacker is an interesting spot because they have bodies that they're intrigued by. They have the Audie Cole, they got Jasper Brinkley back, they have Gerald Hodges, Michael Mauti, all these guys that I know that they're excited about, but there's nobody that's a top 8 playmaker. So Mack would be very tempting if I'm picking. But if that's the case, maybe I might still stay quarterback because it's just such. It's almost all of their problems ultimately come back to the quarterback position. When you look at last year, whenever the defense kept collapsing in those 5-6 games at the end, well, what happened right before those collapses? They had a chance in the 4-minute offense to grind the game out and win a game, and they couldn't do it because the quarterback couldn't make a play, couldn't make a simple pass. There were a couple examples: Chicago, Cleveland, Dallas. Guys are open. And simple passes, especially the Cleveland and the Chicago game, where the quarterback makes a simple completion and they run the clock out. So people would say, oh, yeah, the defense was 31st in the overall defense and it was last in scoring defense. Well, that 4-minute offense let them down as much, if not more, than the 2-minute defense did at the end of those games. You switch those around, it's a 10-win season. So to me, it's the quarterback, and I think I still stay quarterback, and I do like probably Bridgewater would be second in my book.
Okay. Well, you talk about the linebacker position, and this week, former Viking middle linebacker Aaron Henderson admitted that he was often hungover for practices in 2013. In your opinion, how would then defensive coordinator Alan Williams or head coach Leslie Frazier miss these warning signs, especially when Henderson said players knew of his condition?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how he. I'm sure that they had some indication of he wasn't feeling well, or that the guys do go. I mean, without having problems, guys. I would say if it's a recurring problem, then they probably had discussions with it. But if it's an occasional not feeling good, guys have been known to go out and drink a little too much every once in a while.
Sure, these are guys in their 20s normally,
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the linebacker position, you mentioned a couple guys, and from what you've seen with current Viking linebackers such as Mike Mauti and Audie Cole and Gerald Hodges, who, if any of those linebackers, do you think fit best in a Mike Zimmer aggressive defense?
I like Audie Cole. I mean, from the first time he got his opportunity last year, he's a tall guy, he's rangy, he's got speed, he seems to have real good instincts, and he can blitz. I mean, when he blitzes, it's not a hesitant. Like, there would be some times where Aaron Henderson would blitz, or kind of a hesitant blitz. I mean, Audie seems to go all out, and I like him as a middle linebacker. But if you can get a guy that's better than him, you're always looking for something better. But I do like him. We don't know enough about Hodges to make any real judgment. He was a decent special teams player, but I don't know if he can play the weak side.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe you'll see. And Spielman alluded to this earlier in the offseason, that Chad Greenway may have a different role in a Zimmer offense or defense. And so you might see him playing something different. I don't know that he'd be playing in the middle, but maybe, Greenway has a different role. I never really cared for Greenway's role in Frazier's defense. It just seemed like so many times he was put in positions where you wonder, on a perfect day, could that work? Him trying to cover Darren Sproles. It's like, I just don't see that. But I think Zimmer's defense might be a little more aggressive, which would be interesting to see. I got really tired of them. Not that they didn't play the cover two. I mean, that's the misnomer. They played it all the time. But when they did play it in situations, they just dropping back and whenever you would have new faces in the secondary or guys that are not as good in the secondary, there'd be some confusion. There's so many holes when you're dropping back and just playing reactionary. And I'll be interested to see Zimmer's defense in action.
Yeah, well, you talked about it earlier. You mentioned how the defense has really been 31st in the league, really for the past couple of years. And while there's some new faces that we added in free agency with Captain Munnerlyn and Linval Joseph, prior to the draft, this is predominantly the same unit from a year ago. Do you think Mike Zimmer's new defensive schemes can make this defense markedly better this season, especially against the pass, with the limited resources they're going to have that come, through the rest of the draft?
There's reason to get excited on offense with the talent that they have, but defensively right now, you're kind of, if you have excitement about this defense in 2014, you're probably basing it on Mike Zimmer coming in and being able to coordinate it in a way. In Cincinnati, he was able to turn things around and not really have all those, didn't have a lot of All-Pros. He gave one All-Pro in his 6 years there. But yeah, you're taking a leap of faith because I don't blame the Vikings for taking Everson Griffin. When you compare the age and the contracts and everything, it was the right move. But for year one of that transition, is Everson Griffin better at 26 than Jared Allen is at 31? That may take a couple of years before we realize the benefits of going young at that position. Jared might, obviously Jared's going to be motivated by how things unfolded, and he could have a great year this year for the Bears, and he could sack Castle 4 times at TCF Bank Stadium. Then that changes your perception a little bit on right now, because it's generally accepted that hey, they're better on the line because they're younger. Well, you're also throwing out 2 pretty good long-time players in Kevin Williams and Jared Allen. That's not to say that they should be back because their time basically here was done, but perception can change pretty quick. You just have to kind of let it play out.
Yeah, you mentioned Kevin Williams now being an ex-Viking. Do you think Sharif Floyd is ready to be the full-time defensive tackle in this defense? And if so, what does he need to do better to become more of an impact player this year for the team?
Well, he was a hard guy to judge because, he was I don't think they expected in any way, shape, or form him to be there when they picked him. And they had a high grade on him, so they took him. I give him credit for that. They were, but you didn't get a true look at him because he was behind Kevin Williams. And to me, I don't know if he's ready, but he's ready for his opportunity. And he's going to get it, obviously. But from where he's picked, he's quicker. He's obviously he's not as big as Kevin. Kevin Williams was a rarity in that just his size and how quick he was. But Sharif is not as tall, but he's quick. And I think I'll be anxious to see what his strength looks like in year 2 compared to year 1, because he didn't come in as looking like the strongest guy in the world. But he is ready for his opportunity, and I think you got to give it to him and get him some reps and see what he can do when he gets in a rhythm, because he seems like a rhythm-based type of player.
When we jump over to the offensive side of the ball again, Toby Gerhart obviously moved on to Jacksonville in free agency. And with that happening, do you see guys like Bradley Randall or Zach Line being able to step into the backup and third down running back role, or do the Vikings need to look for someone in the draft to fill that void?
Yeah, I think they look in the draft, because right now, and all due respect to Matt Asiata, who stepped in, and he's a no-nonsense runner. When they needed, at the end of the season, they needed, a guy to plow straight ahead and get you 2 or 3 yards. He did it. But the biggest drop-off on this team on the roster, obviously it's because Adrian is great as he is, but the biggest drop-off is, depth-wise, is from, Adrian to Matt Asiata. And with Adrian, the fact that he's had I think he's had over 500 carries more than the second leading rusher in the past 2 years on the Vikings. The fact that he's 29. It's kind of funny because now is when they really need Toby Gerhart the most, and that's when they're not going to have him, because as Adrian gets a little bit older, they're going to need a guy. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went as high as the third or fourth round and taking a running back that can help share the load with Adrian.
It's funny because Adrian always comes out and says, I don't want my workload reduced. And with Norv coming in, do you see him looking to make Peterson more of a three-down back and involve him in the passing game? Or do you, in fact, see him reducing his carries, emphasizing what he does well, but extending his NFL career?
The thing about Adrian being a three-down back, and one reason you saw a lot of Toby on third downs and long was because Adrian, his only weakness that I can see is pass protection. He's not a very good pass blocker. And I don't know if that's something that they go to him and say, we need a little bit better effort. Because he's got all the tools to be I'm not saying he sloughs it off or anything, but it's just not that's not his strength. That's not his knack of being able to pass protect. So if you bring a rookie in, he's not going to be, rookies typically don't pass protect on third down rookie running back. So, it's going to be very interesting. I don't know if Asiata plays that role, but then you get into a situation where you become predictable. If Asiata is your third down blocking back and he's in on the field, you kind of know what's going to happen if you're the defense. But that is something that they need to address because, Toby was had a role that needs to be replaced.
Speaking of Adrian Peterson, a little bit different from just what he does on the field. He was quoted this week as saying he thinks paid tuition is not enough compensation for college athletes, and they should receive some additional pay for the contributions they bring to the university revenue stream. Where do you fall on this issue?
Yeah, I'm a father that has a daughter at Iowa State, and I'm paying tuition, so I'm of the belief that, just personally, that tuition isn't chump change. That's a significant amount of money. But I know what he's saying. The universities make all this money. I don't know what the answer is. If it were up to me, I would let anybody go pro at any age. If you come out of high school, if you want to go pro, and just do it. One of the reasons it doesn't happen in the NFL is because the NFL doesn't want that nightmare of having to scout high schools in addition to colleges, small colleges. But to me, if you want to go to college, you just go to college, and if you want to go pro, and that would be my answer. But you'll never see that happen.
We look back at on the field in 2013. It sure seemed like for a lot of the season the offensive line struggled. They didn't seem to gel well, even though it's the same group that was together the year before. What do you think caused the problems, especially with on the left side of the line? Matt Khalil struggled at times, and certainly we had problems at the left guard spot. Do you think those problems can be corrected in 2014? If so, what do you think they're going to do?
Yeah, Khalil did take a step back. He just was not as consistent. He didn't seem to be as aggressive. Not a real aggressive player to begin with. He's a pass protector. That's what they pay him for over on the left side. Charlie Johnson, I love Charlie, but it seemed to me like he just wasn't in shape. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be in great shape anyways, and that's not necessarily a knock because the offensive linemen aren't typically in the greatest of shape. But yeah, the offensive line last year that was the lost. We've mentioned it. People mentioned it, talk about the offensive line, but they really did take a step back, and that was the one that kind of went under the radar a little bit. But the left side, you bringing Charlie back. I wouldn't be surprised if he has to earn his job back. I don't know if he competes with Jeff Baca or they draft a guy, but guard, I could see a position that they would draft with the hopes of maybe having them compete for a starting job. But yeah, there needs to be a shake-up there. They need to play. They definitely need to play better.
Yeah, you mentioned Jeff Baca, and you've probably seen him in practice. Does he look like he has the tools?
Well, he looked like a rookie lineman last year. Probably the one position that the guys look the most different from year one to year two is the offensive line. They come in and they look like children compared to some of the veteran offensive linemen, and he just had that real look, that real young, sort of soft look, and that I would imagine he'll look a lot different. He'll be a lot stronger in year two. I think he's going to be given an opportunity, to start, and based on how Charlie played last year, he at least has a chance to push him.
Well, Mark, as the Vikings move to TCF Bank Stadium for 2014, from what you see, what are the real advantages and disadvantages you see them facing when they play outdoors at a smaller college stadium?
I've never really been a guy like you're a turf team, you're not a turf team. Now, if you have a Jared Allen, maybe that it's a little different, because the Metrodome, he definitely was a faster pass rusher.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Everson Griffin might be a similar type of player. Maybe your pass rush is not, if it gets slippery, or if you have a game like you did in 2010 when they, played in the snow there, it's a sheet of ice. You're not going to have the pass rush that you would have in the Metrodome. I mean, I'll have to wait and see what it's like noise-wise. I can't imagine it's going to be anywhere near as loud as the Metrodome. So you lose. I look back to that Cowboys playoff game. Tony Romo had no chance. I mean, that place was so loud, and the pass rush was just eating them alive based on the fact that the offensive line couldn't hear the snap. They were that split second slow, and then Jared Allen and I think it was Ray Edwards at that time were just beating Romo up and down the field, and they one blew them out. So yeah, you're not going to have the noise factor, which I think would be the biggest disadvantage, because the Metrodome was a very loud place to play for other teams.
And if we're late December, you're 16th and final game of the season. They've got Green Bay in town, and it's 18 below zero. Are you volunteering for on-field duty that day?
I'm volunteering to sit in the press box by a heater.
There you go.
No, that would be the biggest. I grew up in Cleveland. You watch. You love being outside and watching grass field. But had someone put me inside for 27, however many years the Metrodome was up there, I think I would have a hard time going back outside if I was Minnesotan.
Absolutely. Well, fans are always optimistic for a new season when their team is undefeated. And as you reflect on a team that won just 5 games last year, do you think this Viking team is more likely to be a last-place finisher in the NFC North or a real contender for the playoffs this season?
It's one of those where you get caught thinking back too much to the previous year. I mean, in 2012, when Leslie Frazier was asked about the playoffs, they were coming off that 2011 bad season. And we asked him, what about the playoffs? And he said, well, he basically said they didn't have a chance, and they just kind of laughed at him. Well, then they make the playoffs. And, of course, last year, based off the previous year, you're saying, well, there should be a playoff team that should improve on their number of wins, and make progress. And then, of course, they have a free fall. So, I guess I like the rebound factor a little more, because typically in the NFL, what's down goes up and what's up goes down. It's structured so well for that to happen. And with the schedule and with the draft and the free agency, being available. And so I would say they're closer to being a contender for a wild card, Bert, than finishing last. And I don't even know if I believe that, to tell you the truth. I do like the fact that teams just seem to, unless you're the Patriots or a team that has a franchise quarterback that stays on top. I still pick the Packers to win the division, but I think maybe I'll put more faith in them than with the Lions, I guess.
Well, at least you've given fans some optimism by saying they're leaning more towards the wild card contention than last place, and that's always a good way to finish your interview with here. And Mark, we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts about the Minnesota Vikings with VikeFans.com. And I want to remind our listeners to catch all of Mark Craig's Minnesota Vikings thoughts in his Star Tribune columns, his blogs, and his video reports. And you can get the most up-to-date Viking and NFL news by following Mark on Twitter @MarkCraigNFL. Mark, thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to your continued Minnesota Vikings coverage.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. Appreciate it.
You bet.